The Persephone Foundation. Timeline Archives. Timeline Designation Key Eta-005. Weird War II. A war which began as a dispute over the Polish corridor has turned into a battle for the destiny of the planet. A war that has seen terrible new weapons used in the bid for victory. Germany used chemical weapons and primitive machine men, the product of the infamous Übersoldat program, to secure victory in Stalingrad, and then managed to secure much of Western Russia. Stalin was murdered by his henchmen in person when he abandoned Moscow, and the new troika of Molotov, Beria, and Zhukov elected to use the incantations revealed in the Rasputin diaries. Soldiers of the NKVD's 666th Guards Division made the relevant sigils and signs, and the Eastern Front was consumed by chaos. Whole tank regiments disappeared into titanic sinkholes. Sources of water became poisonous and mutagenic, and soon both German and Soviet troops pulled back, leaving a dead zone of hellish anarchy between the two armies. Meanwhile, in the Far East, Japan sought the means to break the Chinese resistance once and for all. General Ishii's Unit 731 provided the solution. Using pathogens gathered from a mysterious plateau in Central Asia, the general created the ghouls, animated corpses with a hunger for human flesh, and with hideously infective tissues and fluids. They were the perfect biological weapons. Infected foodstuffs were dropped behind Chinese lines from the air, and the outbreak soon caused the complete collapse of the nationalists. Much of China was occupied by Japan, apart from the deep interior, which fell to the communists. In a bid to stop the Axis advance, the British and Americans pushed their own projects forward, finally culminating in the Joint Tube Alloys Manhattan Project, development of the atomic bomb. By 1946, enough of the bombs were ready. The plan was to destroy the German Navy. Plan Z was well underway at this point, as a demonstration before demanding an immediate Axis surrender. It did not entirely work. As the mushroom cloud rose above Wilhelmshaven, Hitler gave orders for the counterattack. The Sanger Silbervogel was the first spacecraft ever created by the human race. It also has the dubious honor of dropping the first bombs from space. Within a week of the atomic bombing, with the Allies still waiting for Berlin's response to their demands, 3 Silbervogel launched simultaneous strikes on Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston. Exactly which part of the Third Reich's crazed military-industrial complex actually created the Hollebombe is unknown, but its effects were terrible. The 3 cities were reduced to blasted wastelands, their buildings shattered, their very earth poisoned, their inhabitants turned into ravening monstrosities. The Allies responded by destroying Kyoto and Hamburg with atomic weapons. Japan launched a new wave of trans-Pacific balloons, these ones loaded with the ghoul pathogen. Germany did not respond. In Berlin, Hitler raged at his commanders, demanding immediate retribution and dismissing concerns about an unlimited exchange of such devastating weaponry. The Fuhrer was just about to order the arrest of his entire general staff when he collapsed, the stress causing him to suffer a stroke. Hitler was an incapacitated vegetable, reliant on an iron lung to survive. With his driving will gone, the Reich suffered a near civil war. General Beck enacted Valkyrie, claiming that the SS had assassinated the Fuhrer. In the West, SS troops disarmed rebelling Wehrmacht units. In the Old Reich, the SA went on the rampage, claiming that the army aristocrats and SS hacks had killed their leader. Eventually, a stable-ish order emerged, with the Army, SS, and Party each holding control over different areas of the Reich. But the momentum was gone, and the war settled down to a grinding stalemate. It is now 1949, and the war drags on. Leading the new order, and greatest of the Axis states, is the Greater Germanic Reich. Germany is fractured into 3 separate commands, all nominally answering to the comatose Hitler. Inner Germany is under the rule of the Nazi Party, who have been seeking to reassert themselves following the breach with the Army and SS. They have control over the largest amounts of industry, which gives them an advantage, but fall far behind in their employment of esoteric weaponry, with their SA legions being equipped with good, but conventional weaponry. Meanwhile, SS Burgundy and SS Fuel continue their utterly insane experiments. The once primitive machine men are now highly advanced cyborgs, albeit with a disturbing tendency to go insane and slaughter everyone around them. Then, of course, there are the efforts of the Paranormal Division, who are trying a necromantic ritual of titanic size, with some help from their comrades in the SS Totenkopf units. The Wehrmacht, meanwhile, has fallen under the control of officers entirely unsympathetic towards Nazism, and now run the occupied East according to the values of the old Kaiserreich. However, their poor relations with the rest of the Reich have starved them of resources, forcing them to make some rather interesting compromises. The Wehrmacht now obeys the commands of the choosers of the slain, whilst beings that straddle the line betwixt wolf and man provide important help for reconnaissance and anti-partisan operations. The only 2 organizations that stand apart from the big 3 are Albert Speer's Ministry of Armaments and Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe. Good relations are required with both, as they supply the vital munitions and air support needed for effective combat. Japan is at the head of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, even if its homeland has suffered from utter devastation at the hands of American bombing. Much of the Japanese nation has been evacuated, either abroad or underground, and most of Japan's war production these days comes from overseas. Japan continues to support its small offensives in India, Australia, and North America. But much of Japan's offensive energy is spent, and she now just tries to cling to what she has, to hold down her vast empire and deal with the ghoul plague that she unleashed. Japanese society has become the most militarized in the world. Even children are required to make their commitment to the emperor, who incidentally hasn't been seen since 1946, when he raised concerns about the atomic bombing of Kyoto and suggested something that caused him to have an accident. And the Yamato race. Japanese submarines are also exploring sunken ruins at the bottom of the Pacific. Already a few have been lost to what they think are giant squids. Whatever it was, it had tentacles. But the IJN is determined to unlock the secrets of this sunken city, no matter how nightmarish it is. The USSR is in similarly dire straits. Since the loss of the most populated and industrialized regions of the Union, the Soviets have been desperately trying to rebuild their industrial base in Siberia. This is aided by the vast numbers of factories Stalin had shipped east during the initial German invasion, and of course that wonder of Soviet industry, slave labor. Vast numbers of inmates of the Gulag slave away for the revolution, creating the arms and armaments needed to keep the Germans at bay. Of course, this does take a lot of people, and Soviet commanders found themselves rather perplexed by actually running out of men. The solution to this was Lysenko's cloning program, which can produce a combat-ready soldier in a mere 3 months. Of course, the resultant troops have no imagination, or capacity for independent thought, which is how the Communist Party likes it, and a lifespan of about 4 years, but it does at least provide the sheer numbers of men needed for Marshal Zhukov's grand offensives into the chaos zone of Western Russia. Finally, there is the United Nations. Formed by the surviving democracies, they probably still deserve the word. Probably. Of the United States and the British Empire. Since the death of President Truman in the Blitz of '46, the United States has been under the emergency rule of President General MacArthur. His autocratic and paranoid regime does have its detractors, but most Americans accept it as necessary to protect them from the ghouls and the Axis. MacArthur has implemented martial law in many states across the Union. Citing the dangers posed by Nazi and Communist, the UN really don't trust the Soviets, and the feeling is mutual. Fifth columnists. And of course, the rampant ghoul epidemic. The United Kingdom is more democratic, even if Winston Churchill keeps winning general elections. He is the guy you want in an eternal war scenario, so it's rather unsurprising. Britain is a fortress island, devoted to producing the war material which supplies the armies raised in the dominions and the colonies. Britain has its own rather deranged weapons development, but their possession of Captain Scott's diary, which details how he and his expedition really died, has given them a head start in excavating the Antarctic ruins. And the southern continent is the focus of the Supernatural Operations Executive's efforts. Neutrality is dead. All human nations are either aligned with the Axis or the Allies. Mutations and abominations spread outside the control of the great powers, whilst the long-forgotten monsters crawl from the shadows to serve. Hordes of insectoid horrors rampage across northern Africa. Holes in reality itself have been punched by the Holobama, while the Soviets and Japanese continue to tinker with the very substance of human life itself. This is the Second World War, which has raged for 10 years without ceasing or halting. Millions lie dead, and millions more will die before this horror will come to an end. Powers of note: the Axis, the New Order, the Greater Germanic Reich of the German nation, Central German Government. Since Hitler was incapacitated, Bormann has been in control. The Old Reich itself has been rather frenziedly re-equipping the SA to be an army capable of facing the Waffen-SS and Wehrmacht in any future civil war. Increasingly, the Fuel Society, rehabilitated in 1947, have been trying to use esoteric extra-dimensional energy for the Reich. SS Burgundy and SS Fuel. Under the control of Reichsfuhrer Himmler, the SS are engaging in ever more insane research. The Special Projects Division creates cyborg Ubersoldaten, hulking robots, and other mechanical monstrosities. The Paranormal Division is busy summoning things from beyond the veil, and seems to be running a gigantic human sacrifice ritual out of its death camps. Valkyrie Command. When Hitler had his stroke, General Beck and his conspirators took control of the Wehrmacht and much of the Eastern Front. Now run, at least sanely, with local collaborators. Efforts at genocide have stopped. However, their lack of good equipment, which is given to the SA and SS, has forced the army to turn to other means. Wolf creatures scout ahead of the panzer columns, and shining female figures have been seen gathering the bodies of the dead. Other members of the New Order. Iron Legionary State of Romania. Still run by Ion Antonescu, who seems a bit paler than usual, Romania is a closed-off state that is extremely friendly with the SS. The higher ranks of the state have become stone-cold creatures that feed off human blood, and they regard the rest of the population as cattle to be fed upon. However, they allow SS paranormal officers to run their more diabolical experiments. Italian Social Republic. Utterly depraved, and fond of trying to summon what they claim are the Olympic gods. Much of central Greece was rendered uninhabitable by an effort by Ovra to summon what they claimed was Zeus. It ended up resembling a hurricane made of lightning. Now Salo has been trying to repeat the experiment along the Gothic line. French state. Fascism has had a while to sink into France, and the country is now a united, if with a lot of German bases, state and member of the New Order. Under the rule of President Laval, France is busy fighting both a communist insurrection and the Anglo-American troops advancing from the south. They have requested a Holobama from Berlin to use in fighting the latter. Other New Order. All fascist white supremacist states aligned with Berlin. Argentina and Peru lead the Axis of the Andes, a military alliance which is busy fighting American-backed Brazil and Chile. South Africa has also suffered from a National Party coup and is currently attempting to supplant Britain as the dominant power in Africa. The Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Inner Sphere. Empire of Great Japan. The home islands are now a bombed-out wreck. Their industries, and frequently people, either moved to Japanese colonies in Korea and Manchuria, or buried deep underground. The American Navy is also proving difficult, having chased the IJN from the Central Pacific and harassing them elsewhere. Japanese submarines are investigating underground ruins in the hope of finding something useful. Manchukuo. Following the bombing of Japan, Manchukuo now contains the majority of the Co-Prosperity Sphere's industrial capacity, and is its main center of production. Strenuous efforts by the IJA have kept much of the ghoul epidemic out of the country, but the crowded slave laborer housing frequently experiences major outbreaks that require purging. New China. Since the collapse of the nationalists in 1945, Japan's puppet government has had control over much of China. However, it is being destroyed from within by millions of ghouls rampaging over the country. Efforts at containment have totally failed, and hundreds of thousands of refugees crowd the cities, where soldiers can protect/exploit them. Of course, the crowded conditions often lead to more outbreaks, so cities are divided into multiple zones by barbed wire, with shoot-on-sight orders applying to any who leave their zone without permission. Outer Sphere. Free India. Azad Hind has squandered most of its former popularity by forcing India into a rapid industrialization, Japan needs more shells, and unleashing various horrors in its attempts to utilize the subcontinent's occult heritage for military purposes. Most of the Indus Valley has been lost to the various terrible things that crawled out of the river, and the ghouls have spread to Bengal. East Indies Kingdom, the primary location of the Japanese Empire's oil extraction facilities. In addition, vast plantations supply the rubber and other resources that the Co-Prosperity Sphere needs to maintain a modern war. It also serves as a key location for forced labor, with millions being shipped out to Japan's other puppets to supply the industrial companies there. Also hosts lots of IJN bases for operations in the Indian Ocean. Pacific States of America only controls a fraction of the territory it nominally claims, but the Japanese armies dug in deep along the coast, from Anchorage to the Panhandle. American forces are far too busy dealing with the West Coast ghouls to evict them, so they continue skirmishing with the Canadians in the Yukon. German-supplied V-2 rockets have been shipped here, in preparation for new rocket attacks on American industry. Other co-prosperity sphere. All essentially Japanese puppet states, with a large IJA garrison keeping them in line. Tibet is the only real exception to this, as their control over certain ancient scrolls of rather diabolic potency, which provide the only access to a mysterious and otherwise inaccessible Asian plateau that is vital to Japan's bioweapons programs. This gives them a bit of leeway when dealing with Tokyo. The Allies. The Comintern. Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Soviet government under Molotov. After 8 years of war, the Soviet Union is running out of people. In order to remedy this, Comrade Lysenko has been put in charge of the Soviet Union's latest scientific effort. Now vast numbers of new soldiers arrive at the front, but normal Red Army troops note they neither talk nor ever seem to remove their gas masks. Gulag system under Beria. Beria was put in charge of the entire Gulag following Stalin's murder, and has been using it to supply the bulk of the USSR's munitions ever since. Slave labor camps cover the tundra, mining resources, making weapons, being experimented on in order to provide the proletariat with new weaponry. Stavka under Zhukov. Marshal Zhukov has taken sole command over the forces of Army Front West, and has been launching probing attacks beyond the chaos of the Ostfront for the past 2 years. Sometimes these probes are responded to by the Wehrmacht, and brutal battles erupt in the anarchic hell that used to be Russia. Zhukov receives all the latest weapons for his use. It has been preparing for a larger effort than his previous probes. Other members of the Comintern. People's Liberation Army. Although coastal China and Tibet have fallen under Japanese dominance, the Communists control the interior. They have been successful in keeping the ghoul plague out of their territory, mostly by the summary execution of refugees fleeing from the coast, when they aren't herded into slave labor camps, of course. The Resistance. The communist resistance tricked the Gaullists into launching an uprising, and took their place when the Germans crushed the aforesaid uprising, now waging a much more successful insurgency against the French state and the Germans, are not interested in cooperating with Patton. Red Army of the West. Entirely directed from Moscow for the purposes of bullying the UN into doing what it wants. When there are no Allied offensives against Germany, the Red Army explode bombs across America, only quieting down once the Second Front has got a bit more active. They're also sending information about the Manhattan Project back to Moscow. Other Comintern. All 3 of these states are basically desolate wastelands where the USSR tests its latest weaponry. The native nomads are often the test subjects of these experiments, poisoned, shot, immolated, and otherwise killed at the Red Army's discretion. The United Nations. United States of America. Federal government. America took a hell of a battering during the Blitz of '46, with much of the West Coast being infested with ghouls and the great cities of the East being destroyed by German Hohlebomber. Even worse was the effort in Philadelphia in 1947 to invade Germany via teleporter. Over 10 divisions disappeared into transdimensional space, although they occasionally emerged to raid locations all over the Americas. Manhattan Project. General Groves has been given control over the entire West for the twin purposes of containment and weapons development. From his Groom Lake headquarters, Groves has seen the development of the atomic bomb, the Philadelphia apparatus, the Omni-Barrier Shield program, and of course, the horrific failure that was the Super Soldier Serum. United States of Europe. Patton has taken supreme control over Allied forces in the Mediterranean, but his advance into the soft underbelly of the New Order has been slowed by fierce German resistance and the more crazed fruits of Nazi science wreaking havoc. Patton has been trying to break the Gothic line using T-28 and Tortoise super heavy tanks, but with limited results so far. His other drive into southern France has met much more success, and this is where Patton is pinning his hopes for 1949. British Empire, United Kingdom. Still under Winston Churchill, the UK is the most fortified place on Earth. Since the devastation of the East Coast, American industry has faltered, and as a result, Britain has had to take up much of the slack in supplying the Allied war effort. Britain is working on a new generation of V for Victory, bombers to break through Germany's SAM shield and resume the bombing campaign. British dominions. Canada is containing the Japanese in Alaska, Australia in Darwin. Still smarting over the defection of South Africa to the Axis, but Jan Smuts and the other exiles remain in London, plotting revenge. The Australian government is also undertaking large excavations under Ares Rock, and is not informing its partners in the Empire exactly what they are doing. British colonies. The British Empire supplies a vast amount of men and material to the Allied cause. Since the fall of much of India to the Axis, Africa has supplied the majority of Britain's vast colonial mercenary armies. The manpower thus provided is vital in keeping what remains of the Raj intact and the swarm out of sub-Saharan Africa. British island colonies also provide key bases for the Royal Navy and United States Navy. Free France. What remains of de Gaulle's government is an autocratic military dictatorship controlling much of West Africa. Still very angry about Patton's refusal to hand over either southern France or Algeria to their control. They have focused much of their energies at fighting the swarm, content to let their allies take the main brunt of the war against Germany. Other United Nations. British and American allies, supported and supplied by the two main UN powers. Brazil has been fighting the Argentines for domination of South America, without much success so far. The states of the Middle East struggle against German-aligned Iraq, where the Asia Corps continues to protect the Iraq oil fields, which supply the German war machine with petroleum. Other powers of note. Irish Republican Army activity. The IRA managed to seize control of Ireland in 1946 and declared war on Britain. This proved to be an unwise decision, and now Ireland is occupied by the British Army. Germany continues to supply the IRA by U-boat, and as a result, they continue to wage an increasingly mad struggle, even detonating a smuggled Hulle bomb under a British base. Areas devastated by the Hulle bomb. The Hulle bomb, Hell Bomb, is the Third Reich's superweapon, employed during the Blitz of 46, when Axis and allies exchanged superweapons on a vast scale. The bomb opens up rifts to another dimension, resulting in the bombed area becoming haunted by ghostly figures, baleful energies, and hideous mutants abound. Areas where the Baba Yaga has been sighted. The Baba Yaga, the witch of the Iron Forest, the tyrant of the woods. It's what the peasants of Russia say the thing that lurks outside is. Shadowy figures are seen in the woods. German soldiers and partisans alike are found by their fellows in the morning, eviscerated, with little piles of stones surrounding their corpses, and figures made of sticks hanging from the trees. Areas infested by the Swarm. Fighting between the Africa Corps and the British in Libya ended up awakening a voracious insectoid race, buried by the Egyptians thousands of years ago. They have swarmed over much of northern Africa, devouring all life they find in a tidal wave of jaws and chitin. Containing the menace in the Sahara is one of the main drains of Allied manpower. Antarctica. Mysterious ruins have been found buried in the Nonatics and under glaciers of Antarctica. The Axis and Allied agents have been very busy trying to excavate anything that could be of military use. Of course, they often bump into each other, so firefights echo throughout the continent. Occasionally, they wake something up. Anomalous areas. There are a variety of reasons why these different areas are so abnormal, but all have either extremely hostile and aberrant inhabitants, or warped and deformed space-time, or both. As a result, both Axis and Allies try to avoid them whenever possible, although they do occasionally bomb them, to be safe. Areas infested by ghouls. In these areas, all society outside well-defended fortress redoubts has completely collapsed under the relentless assault of the ambulatory deceased. Much of the larger hordes are dealt with by aerial bombardment. Napalm! More napalm! With ground troops engaging the remainder with rifles and machine guns. This system works, most of the time. Points of interest. The San Francisco infestation is the largest in the United States. Although the Chicago outbreak certainly has the potential to outclass it, containment units are being sent in. What with the Alabama and the Philadelphia incident, the East Coast isn't a very pleasant place. President MacArthur has the entire place under martial law. The annexed Azores contain the main U-boat bases in the Atlantic. Allied efforts at capturing it have failed. Nazi Germany denies any involvement with this horror show. When the SS tried to summon a demon here, the British invaded. Rumors that Rasputin of all people was helping them remain unsubstantiated. It is rumored that Erwin Rommel and the last of the Africa Corps finished their mad rampage across Africa here, and are still hiding somewhere deep in the jungle. The new Republic of South Africa has joined the Axis and made its non-white population available to German scientists for experimental purposes. A German expedition to Hatay resulted in what can only be described as wrath. The Soviets detonated their first ever atomic device here in 1948. The Japanese have mostly been contained in Darwin, but occasionally they stage breakouts. Allied forces report seeing strange circular craft flying over the glaciers here. This has been a Persephone Foundation timeline reading. Thank you for listening.